and all of that. Okay. I'd like to welcome everybody to our webinar today, the top 5 ways SharePoint 2013 can help your business organize and share. This webinar is brought to you by New Horizons. We're a worldwide training provider. We offer online, in-person, and at-your-door trainings, as well as a variety of other modalities and methods. We have 2,100 classrooms, 2,400 instructors in 56 different countries, and we have apparently trained 3 million student days of training per year, of which I am a small little portion of that. My name, by the way, is Ryan. I'll be your instructor today. I'm a senior applications instructor out of Hartford, Connecticut, and I'm a Microsoft certified trainer. Today's agenda, we're going to begin with just a short introduction, a quick review of SharePoint. Then we're going to get into our 5 ways SharePoint 2013 can help your business organize and share. And the 5 ways I've decided to talk about today, the 5 things I think that are going to be important, is we're going to start with website navigation, just the fact that SharePoint is a website and why that's a good thing for you. Then we'll talk about co-authoring, some of the neat things that happens when SharePoint 2013, which is often part of Office 365, gets utilized with the cloud. So cool cloud things you can do. After that, we'll talk about the magic of metadata, one of those buzzwords that gets thrown around a lot, like synergy or something to that extent. But metadata is actually a vital part of SharePoint, and the proper use of it can make your SharePoint sites really awesome. Fourth, we'll talk about permissions, the fact that you can have SharePoint lock people out of things or allow people to be into things, and for the fact that the permissions are relatively easy to manage and modify. And because it's a Microsoft program, and usually things like your Active Directory are Microsoft programs, they work really well together. So you don't have to create a whole new system to make this work. Finally, we'll talk about automation, getting workflows running so that you can sit back, drink a daiquiri, and relax and let SharePoint work for you. So let's go ahead and start with website navigation. We'll talk about the top links in the quick launch, and then we'll talk about using pages to show information in a quick and easy to understand way. The whole idea of this is to make your SharePoint site a lot easier for people to navigate than would be some other modality. So I'm going to take you to a SharePoint site, and this is what we have right here. And so SharePoint, by the way, just for those that maybe don't have a great definition for it, I always tell people SharePoint is a program that kind of has 2 aspects to it that really is going for it. First of all, it's a website program. So you can make websites in SharePoint really easy. You don't need to know how to code. You don't need to have any fancy IT backgrounds. You can pretty much make a web page and make it look okay without having to know anything. Helps if you know more stuff, but you know, as it does everywhere. So you can make a website really easy with SharePoint. SharePoint is also fantastic because of its storage capabilities. You have the ability to store documents in your SharePoint site. You also have the ability to store information in what might as well be called databases, because that's what they are, but they represent as lists. Now, SharePoint websites are great for a couple reasons. First of all, they tend to look the same. So once people are comfortable with SharePoint, when you go from one site to another or one page to another, a lot of the interface stays the same, as does most websites that you go to. And the parts of it that stay the same, the things that make it really, really great, is this section up here at the top called the top link bar, and the section on the left-hand side called the quick launch. So one of the things that can make SharePoint really beneficial for you is if you treat it like a website, you can send people to a SharePoint site, and they should, fingers crossed, be able to navigate throughout and get to the things they want to get to. You shouldn't have to hold their hand and tell them what folder something in or things like that. So case in point, I have a SharePoint list. It's in my site contents, and it's called the time off request list. And this is where I want people to go to request time off in my fancy SharePoint utopia that I have. And so they'll click new item and fill the whole thing out, and that's great. So to do something like this, there's a lot of different parts to it. They might want to look at the calendar view, and then they say, wait a minute, I don't know what's going on there. I'm going to go back to the other view, and it just becomes problematic. So one of the big things that SharePoint can offer you is the ability to place a lot of information and customize it on a web page. So what I've done here is I've created a web page called Time Off Requests. In this web page, I've placed what are called web parts in 3 specific locations. I've also typed a whole bunch of stuff up here at the top. So let me take a few seconds. I'm going to edit the page, and I'll show you kind of how all of this works. The way SharePoint web pages work is that you get to choose some sort of text layout to organize your data. So I've chosen the 2 columns with a header layout. I could change it right now if I wanted to add a footer, 3 columns, anything that I want to. If there's a section of this that you don't use, it will normally just collapse itself and you won't see it. So you could potentially have it be 3 columns with a header and footer and only use 2 of the columns, and it would still actually be okay. Then, inside each of these sections of a SharePoint web page, you can either type what you want to. So I typed some text, very nice. Or you can insert in a variety of things. So at the very top of SharePoint, you see that there is this Insert tab. I can insert into a SharePoint web page tables to organize my information, pictures, video and audio, fancy new Office 365 video, and I can make things into hyperlinks. And finally, I can insert in web parts. Within SharePoint, a web part is a pre-built piece of content. One of the most common web parts that you would put in would be a list or library. So you can actually insert onto a web page an existing list or library. So let me show you that. In the Insert tab, I can click Web Part, and you'll see that there's a whole bunch of different categories you can choose from. So there's lots of interesting web parts you can choose from, and lots of companies then go out of pocket and buy third-party web parts, which can be really neat, or they build them internally. Their IT builds web parts, and you can use them. So there's all sorts of kind of things. You think of them like apps on your phone. The apps category has in it every list and library from this site. So I could say, oh, insert in my time off request list. And I click Add. And my cursor is down below here, and there it is. There's my time off request list. Now, once you've put in a list or library, on the right-hand side, you can edit the list or library. You can edit the web part and how it displays. So at the bottom here, I can click Edit Web Parts, and I'm going to be able to choose a view. So I'm going to say I want the upcoming view. Views, by the way, are created at the list or library level. So in my list or library, I can create views. And views are almost always set up by metadata. So you're going to kind of see how all this stuff circles around itself again and again and again. So I had created previously an upcoming view to only show the time off requests that are coming up, not anything that has previously happened. So I choose upcoming. I can then also change the toolbar type. Full toolbar shows the new item button if I want to. Maybe I'll leave it. Appearance, I can change its name. It's called time off request list, but I could actually call it upcoming requests, or maybe upcoming time off. I can go down below and change other aspects. You can change the height and the width of the web part. I wouldn't probably do that too much just because if you shrink it, it doesn't actually shrink everything. It just creates scroll bars. There's a variety of other things you can change if you want to. The various Ajax and miscellaneous stuff is usually pretty good. The ability to display a search box or something like that, so you can search for something. And I go ahead and say OK. And once I've done that, once I've changed my web part and changed its settings, and I say OK, assuming that the web page wants to behave today. Come on. Does it want it to be a pain? Of course it wants to be a pain. All right, let's try this again. So as we wait for the site to get going, must be the lunch rush or something on the site. I'm going to go ahead and restart. So briefly again, I insert in my web parts. I edit my web part. I change the view. I type in a different title, and I say OK. And this time it's working. And you can see that my view has changed, the title has changed, and now I can save my web page. So the strategy here of this kind of idea is that I can create web pages that have multiple instances of the same list or library right here. I even added a link that I copied from the list. I copied the new item link, and I even added a link where you can click to request new time off. So you can actually fill out the form and request new time off, and then come back here and be able to see that your time off has been requested and all that kind of stuff. See it on the calendar. So this is our first step, the idea of the fact that SharePoint really helps you with website navigation tendencies. So people do not have to ask, what folder is this thing in? What file should I use? Is that attachment you emailed me the correct one, or do I need something different? SharePoint is a website, and when you go to it, if set up properly, people can navigate themselves through. You also, of course, can modify and change this quick launch on the left-hand side and the top links at the top using the Edit Links buttons. So that's our first way that SharePoint 2013 is going to help your business organize and share. Websites are really easy for people to get to. They save them in their favorites. They can live in this website, get what they need out of it, and you're not having to worry about people getting lost too often or finding old things or the wrong things in places like their email. The second thing that SharePoint is going to do to help you organize and share, and this time it's more about sharing, is co-authoring and other Office 365 attributes. So I'm going to take us now to a library. And one of the first things that needs to be mentioned about SharePoint and what happens with SharePoint is that unlike, say, an email attachment, where I email 7 people an attachment of a file, when you have SharePoint and you have a file, that's it. This is the file. So if I go to a library and I see a file in here, that's the only one. It's not that this is my copy of the file. This is just the file. If someone else comes in and edits the file, I would then be able to open it and see their changes. If I wanted to send 10 people a link to a file and say, hey, go make changes, instead of attaching it, I can now send them the hyperlink to the SharePoint library. And now they have the access to this file. They all go work on it, and I get great things like versioning and the ability to co-author. Now, co-authoring a document involves opening it up, and for certain Office programs, you can open it up in actual downloaded Office, but for most of them, the easiest way to co-author is to open it up in the online versions of those programs. So with many SharePoint 2013 accounts, if you do Office 365 or something to that extent, you are going to find that you suddenly have Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and OneNote online. So you can actually edit and change documents in these online versions. Now, these online versions are great for quick, easy changes. But the first thing I want you to know about these online versions, they are not by any means as good or nowhere near better than the ones that you have installed on your computer. So the Excel, the Word, the PowerPoint you have on your computer, even if it's PowerPoint 2010 or Word 7, is actually more powerful than the Word Online, Excel Online, or PowerPoint Online programs. But here's where they don't have the cool feature that you can get in the online version, at least for some of them. Word actually allows you to do it. In Word, PowerPoint, or Excel Online, you can do what's called co-authoring. And what that means is that if you are editing the document in the online version and somebody else comes in and edits the document in the online version, you can actually be working simultaneously. So I can come here and say, okay, I think marketing is going to be marketing 112. And I type in marketing 112. Now, you'll notice it says up in the top right corner, Ethan Kane, who's my nemesis, by the way, is also editing. And you can see there's a little cursor that says Ethan Kane is right here. Now, pretend you don't hear me run away from my computer for 5 seconds, but watch what's going to happen when I go to the Ethan Kane computer and I start changing things. Now, for the fact that Ethan Kane can't even spell his own name, and now I'll fix it for him, you notice that even though I wasn't at the computer, and even though you didn't see me do anything, here on your screen, stuff suddenly happened. So, like Google Docs and some of the other programs you might know about, Excel, Word, and PowerPoint Online with SharePoint allows you to do simultaneous editing when you're using these online versions. Not only that, it's keeping track of what you're doing. And these online versions also auto-save. You'll see at the top it says the word saved. So anything I do will automatically be saved without me having to press the save button. And if I ran back to Ethan Kane's computer, then Ethan Kane could change this stuff as well. So this is a great thing, especially for companies and people who are in multiple locations. The ability to jump together and do something like this is really fantastic if you needed to do quick editing of a document or you just wanted to see who else did it. Now, one quick note about this feature, about co-authoring. If the document has been checked out, then it can't be co-authored. Because if you've checked out a document, it is now specifically yours to do with what you want. So you might actually not want to be co-authoring with somebody at a certain time, and you really want to own this document to be able to do your thing to it. And so by checking it out, the other person cannot edit the file until you check it back in. So not only can you stop them from editing the document, but checking out will do that. Some libraries automatically are set to check out, so you have to check out. So just things to keep that in mind. Similarly, on kind of a related note, you can also sync libraries to your desktop, so you can have this library as a folder inside your computer. So it just looks like a normal folder. You can open up files, you can make changes to them quick and easy, and it will be synced automatically with your SharePoint library. So you also have the ability to have offline access to your documents if you need to, using the sync option. So that is our second bullet point, our second way that SharePoint 2013 can help your business organize and share. Now for the third one, we're going to talk about metadata. And so the first question, so what is metadata? Well, metadata often gets defined as data about data. And an easy way to think about it is think about all of your files in the library like books. So every file is a book. Now, this is true because when you to know what's in a file, you have to open it up. So to know what's inside a book, you got to open it up and read it. But when we all go to the bookstores, you don't have to open up and read a couple pages of a book to know what it's about because you have the front cover, the back cover, the price on the side, the USB, all sorts of different pieces of information, USB, I meant ISBN, pieces of information that help you know what's going on with this book. Is it an Oprah book club pick? Is it a bestseller? Is it a certain genre? Stuff like that. So what is metadata? Metadata is like that for your documents. So you have a document, and if you think of your document like a book, metadata is like stickers or labels that you put on the document itself. So metadata does not show up in the document necessarily. It's usually about the document. Now the thing that makes metadata really, really, really great in SharePoint is all the things that you can do with it. So in SharePoint, I have this library right here. This library is my project deliverables library. Now in SharePoint, metadata is the columns that you see with your library or list. So when I have a file called department numbers, you'll notice that I have a version number. So what version is it? I notice when it was last modified and who last modified it. I notice what document purpose it supposedly has. I notice what region it has. If it was checked out to somebody, I would see that here as well. So this metadata tells me about my documents. But metadata can do so many other awesome things. With metadata, I can create views that organize my data. So using that region column that we have, I can group my documents into each region. So there's a mid-Atlantic region, a northeast region, a northwest, and a southeast. So each of my documents are grouped by the region that's been applied to them. So the metadata helps me organize my documents this way. And what makes this even better is that if I had been using something like folders to organize my documents by region, I wouldn't then be able to also look at my documents organized by document purpose. So document purpose is a completely different idea, and these are different numbers of files in a different order. But you can see how I can make it look like there's a folder structure, document purpose, and then region. So views and metadata help you show the information in a variety of different ways. Back to our kind of first thing, when we had that time off request list, the metadata is how I make all these views work. The metadata for this my requests uses the employee name to only show the viewer of this page what his or her requests are. So it uses this to filter to say only show when the instructor name or the employee name is equal to the person seen on the page. Upcoming time off looks at the start date and says the start date has to be greater than or equal to today. So it's only going to let me show you start dates that start today or later. So all this other stuff has been filtered out. Views can also show things on a calendar. So this calendar view uses the start date and the end date columns to show when this person is out or in or things like that. So metadata can really be a beneficial part of everything. Not only that, but metadata also is going to help in a whole variety of other unseen things. when we get to our final section of the day and we talk about workflows, workflows are completely based on the data. Without metadata, workflows tend to not be able to do too much. But if I have a region column and I want a workflow to route a document to a certain person based on its region, I can do that using the metadata. So the workflow would be able to say, if it's the Southeast region, send it to this person. If it's the Northeast region, send it to this person. If it's the Northwest region, send it to this person. And so I can route a document based upon what region something is set to. Document purpose, same exact sort of idea there. Now, some of these columns come pre-built. Version was pre-built into the library, same with modified, modified by, checked out to, check and comment. Some of them I created. I created the document purpose and the region column. To create a column for your library, all you have to do is go to the Library tab and you click Create Column. When you do, you get to give the column a name and you choose what type of information it can contain. So you could have a project document description column that's multiple lines of text, so you could type a couple paragraphs. You can have a choice column, like we did for region, where I only want them to choose between a couple specific choices. I don't want to make somebody type in Northeast. I want them just to choose it from a drop-down list. If I wanted to put in a quantity or some sort of other number, remember zip codes and things like that are not numbers, but an actual real number, I could. Currency for money, date and time for date and time. So this will help me if I wanted to have a due date for each of these documents and then show it on a calendar. I can use a date and time column to do that. Lookup is one of the coolest columns because it allows you to use another list to provide the drop-down options for this list. So let me give you a quick showing of what I mean by this. I have a list called Aeromar Products. Inside Aeromar Products, you can see all these different products that I have. Then I have a list called Aeromar Product Sales. When I add a new item to this list, down here there's this product option. Now, product is not something I manually had to type in. What I did is I said, okay, let them choose a product from that products list. So notice how there is no, there's just these sprockets and stuff like that. If I go back to the Aeromar products and I add a something like this, just something ridiculous. Now suddenly I have a new one. I go back to my product sales, I click new item, and product, and there we go. Do you see me? It's right there. So one of the columns you can create is this great lookup column, which creates connections between different lists or libraries. Yes or no is just a checkbox that you can use in a metadata field just so you can check it or not check it. Person or group is also neat because person or group allows you to connect this with your Active Directory and permissions so that when you're putting in a person or group name, it actually has to be somebody in your organization, not just whatever you want to type. And it can then be used in a workflow to route to that person, all sorts of neat things. Hyperlink or picture, if you want one of those, and then calculated columns where you can do just about anything you can do in Excel to calculate a result. So if I had a quantity column and a price column, I can definitely do a calculated column that multiplies the two to give me the total sale amount. Stuff like that. Then I could have a tax column that takes total sale times the tax rate, and on and on and on and on, and be able to have as many calculated columns as I need. So to create a column for your library or list is really, really great. And then to change the metadata for one of these things, usually you just go to the callout and come down to properties, or you check the item and you click edit properties up in the ribbon, making the change of this really easy. And this is all kind of about why you shouldn't be using folders, but you should be using these instead, because when you have metadata in your libraries and lists, you make life a lot easier than the idea of using folders as a structural device. So libraries and lists do better with metadata than they do with folders for a variety of reasons. So that is our metadata point. And hopefully now that it makes a little more sense, you can say, oh, that could be a really awesome thing, because all my people have to do is they upload a file, they fill out a little form, and suddenly the file shows up where it's supposed to show up. And people will be able to see it, people will be able to, workflows could be triggered, all sorts of cool stuff can happen with the use of metadata. So hopefully now it's awesome. Our penultimate point is permissions. One of the things that makes SharePoint really great is your ability to limit who actually gets to have access to things. Now, we can do this with shared drives as well. So shared drives can have permissions. You can, of course, limit who you email stuff to and so forth, but you don't really have that kind of control. And of course, you could password protect your files and stuff as well. But with SharePoint, you have pretty much control over your site and who gets to see it, who gets to see what, and what do they get to do. So not only is it just, do I get to see it or not, it's, do I get to see it? Okay, well, do I get to edit things? Oh, do I get to be a site owner and have full control over the site? So the way to think about permissions in SharePoint is think about it like your house. In your house, you have that front door first lock. And for a lot of us, once you're in the front door, you're set. So in SharePoint, the equivalent of a front door, kind of first and only lock, is what's called site permissions. So when I am in SharePoint, I can go up to my site settings and go over in my site settings to site permissions. Inside site permissions, I will see the people or groups that have been granted access to my SharePoint site. There's usually 3 levels of access. Owners, who are the site owners who have full control over the site. Members, who are people who work on files, work on lists, and they have contribute access. And then visitors, who are usually people who can see a site. They can click things and read things, but they can't do any editing, addition, or subtraction to the site. So they can't delete files, they can't upload new files. The site is like a static website to them with no editing capabilities. Now, these groups usually come pre-created, and you can also, of course, create additional SharePoint groups if you want to. To add somebody to a group, you simply go into that group, and once you're in that group, you can click the New button. Now, if you're not a site owner, you can't do this. So one of the things that has to happen to be able to add and give people permissions is you actually have to be one of these site owners to begin with. So I click New, and here I start typing in a name. So even though he's my nemesis, Ethan Kane can certainly be given access to this site. He's a smart enough guy. I can include a message if I want to. And down here where it says Show Options, I can send an email invitation. When I click Share, Ethan Kane's name is added to this list. Now, the way permissions work in SharePoint is all dependent upon kind of how your site is set up. Most SharePoint sites and site collections are set up for internal use only. So the only people you're going to be able to add and the only people who can do work are going to be people in your organization. And this is usually a good thing, because usually this is, the back-end stuff, the stuff you don't want clients or other people to know about. So you're only giving access to people who work in your company. Some SharePoint sites, though, and sometimes it's just parts of a SharePoint site, actually are allowed to be shared with outside people. So there's also SharePoint sites that can be shared outside of your organization, where you can give a client or an external temp or somebody like that access even without them being part of your Active Directory or part of your organization. So it just will depend on what you can do here, but this is how we add people to groups and we grant them permission. By keeping people in groups, we make all of this a little bit easier to manage. Think about, at your work, it's not that everyone has their own key, like their own weird specific key. You have one key that opens up, this set of doors, and you make a copy of it for all the people who need it. So by putting people into groups, you can organize them and manage them in smaller pieces, making it easier on you. Now, our premise so far has been that SharePoint's like a house and that you have a front door key. But so many of us have locked doors, have locked closets, have locked safes, all sorts of places in your house that are maybe off limits to most people, even if they were to be given a front door key. So to do this, we can actually break permissions at the sub-site level, at the list or library level, and even, although it's not usually recommended, you can even break permissions at the individual item level. The reason we don't want you to do this too often is that if you break items too small, if every single file has its own permissions, it becomes really, really difficult to remember who has access to what, and that's where mistakes can happen. So it's better to try to keep things kind of in as simplified a method as possible by just doing it per libraries or something like that. So let's say that this Aeromar restricted documents library needs to be off limits to people. So I need to not have people have access to it. Well, what I can do is I can go up to the library tab at top, and I can go over to the library settings. As a site owner, library settings, list settings, these things are going to be vital to you all the time. So I click library settings, and in my library settings, in the middle column, is a button that says permissions for this document library. So I can click permissions for this document library, and it actually should start its life looking like this. This is what it's going to look like by default. It says this library inherits permissions from its parent. Every library, every list, every file, everything, by default, inherits permissions from the top level site, from the actual site permissions. However, you can, at any point, tell it to stop that. So you can say, stop inheriting permissions. And when you do, you can then remove groups who you don't want to have access. So I say, okay, I don't want the viewers or the visitors, the low-level people, to see this at all. And now only members and only owners can see the Aeromar restricted documents. In fact, if a visitor came to my site, they wouldn't even see this link. It would have disappeared on them. They would just see project tasks and then Aeromar product sales, nothing in between. If somebody were to be given the link and they clicked it, they would get an access denied screen. So the nice thing about SharePoint with your permissions is this ability to control access, to really control who can do what on your SharePoint site, and it doesn't have to be something different than what you've already done before, because access will be granted the same way that you do things like email and so forth. So you're going to have to just type in people's names, and it'll be simple enough. Similarly, if I go to my time off requests list, and now I say, wait a minute, actually I want to let everyone add stuff to it. You can go to the list settings, library or list settings, and you can go down to the permissions, and unlike the last one where we took away permissions, I could stop inheriting, and once I do that, I could take the visitors and the viewers groups and say, okay, now I want to edit user permissions and give them all contribute access. So now, unlike everywhere else where the visitors and the viewers can only look but not touch, in this time off request list, everyone who's in any of these groups can add a time off request or edit a time off request as well. So we have this ability to both restrict access further if we'd like to, or increase access for more people at a case-by-case, library-by-library, list-by-list basis. And this can go down to individual files, but doesn't necessarily have to. So this is our fourth point. Our final point is usually the one everyone's most excited about, and that is workflows, or the premise behind how terminators are going to come back and get us eventually once our workflows learn that we're not paying them. So workflows are automated processes. You can create workflows for a list or library to automatically do stuff for you. So if you want a workflow to automatically do something, it can. To do this, you most often need to have a program that is free, but you need to have it, called SharePoint Designer. This also implies that your site, that your company, allows the use of SharePoint Designer. Some organizations restrict access because they don't want people using this, and so you'll download it, you'll try to use it, and it will say, sorry, you can't. So you'll have to find out from your organization, but if you are the organization or thinking about setting all this up, you can decide whether this is a good idea. Now, what you can do is I can go to one of my lists or libraries. So I'm going to go to my time off request list, this thing that I have here. And you'll notice that title is empty, and maybe I want to send, have it send an email or something like that. So to automate things, I can go to the list or library tab, and on the far right, there's going to be workflow settings, and I can click the Create a Workflow in SharePoint Designer option. That will open up SharePoint Designer, open up the site, and open up the Create List Workflow aspect. When you create a workflow for SharePoint 2013, you actually get 2 workflow platforms to choose from. So you actually get to have basically whatever you want to with it. And the way workflows work is you set up a step-by-step process for the workflow to do things. The biggest steps in workflows in 2013 especially are called stages. So if you have a stage, you can potentially then have another stage underneath it. If you don't need all these stages, you don't have to have them. But the neat thing about stages is stage 1 could go to stage 2, or you could potentially have it jump to stage 3 and then back to stage 2 if it needs to be, or stuff like that. So you have all the ability with stages to kind of leapfrog around. Now inside each of these stages, you are going to be placing in conditions and actions. Conditions create criteria that, if true, the thing inside of this box will be done. If not, it skips and goes around it. So if you need to have something happen in your workflow only if this thing is set a certain way, then you're going to use conditions. If you just want it to do actions, just to make it actually do things, you can go to the actions. So you can see there's all sorts of stuff here. The ability to do calculations, the ability to send emails, make the workflow pause for certain amounts of time. You can edit or create items in lists or libraries. You can wait for changes to then do something or set a field in a current item. So there's all sorts of possibilities here. You can assign tasks as part of your workflow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my time off request list and I'm going to have it automatically set the title portion because it doesn't do that right now. I want it to automatically set it. And then I'm going to have it email me really quickly. So I clicked, do it again so you can see it, action, and I went down and found set field in current item. When I clicked it, it shows me this thing. It says set field to value. Anything that's blue and underlined has to be set. So I click it and it says, oh, which field do you want to set? And I say title. What value do you want it to be? I could type something in right now. If I press the FX, I get to choose a single thing for it to do. The real cool one, though, is the 3 dots, the builder. If I click the builder, I can have it change to whatever I want it to. So I can say add or change. I say I want it to put in the employee name dash request type, and then in parentheses I'm going to put the start date and the end date. I'm going to do this a little fast, and so I apologize if you're trying to take notes really, really quickly. But I'll tell you at the end kind of where all this stuff will show up in our other training. So if you're looking to do some of this stuff, you can just certainly take full-day classes where we actually slow down and talk slower and do examples instead of just run, 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 run. So I put all that in. Cool. I can also then have it do something like send an email. So you can make workflows send emails on your behalf. I'm going to make the person who created the item subject's going to be your time off request. And in my email, I'm actually going to use some of these fields, so it puts information in there for me. All right, so I have the email set. Now, in these stages, one of the little tricks you have to do is at the very end, you have to make it actually end. So I'm going to make it end of workflow. And now I go to my workflow settings, and I can actually trigger so that this workflow runs automatically when an item is created. I don't even have to make it start. I just say, hey, new item is created. We're going to do this. And up at the top, I get to publish the workflow. So if I'm ready for it to be live, I publish it. It takes a few seconds here to publish the whole thing, set it up, and all that. And once it's published, I can go back and I can add a new request. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer. Hopefully it won't give me any sort of guff. Really? I don't think there were errors. There we go. Looks like it actually works, so we'll see what happens. Okay, so back here, I'm going to go ahead and add a new item. I don't worry about the title. Put my fake name, Instructor. And let's see. A request tomorrow off. Why not? All the way through Monday. So we get it off anyways. So I put that in. Let's see it right here. Now, one of the things that's going to happen, it takes it a few seconds sometimes to finish up the workflow. So it's not like it's going to magically happen immediately. So sometimes you have to have it take a little bit of time Apparently it didn't publish, stupid thing. Let's try it one more time, see if it's going to be nice. There we go. That time it worked. Right, now back here, let's create one more real quick and see it actually. Be on bereavement then through the weekend. We put it in. Now you notice a column got automatically created, which is nice. We give it a second, we refresh, and you can see that, hey, look at that. That title showed up. If I were to go to Instructor's email account, I got myself a nice little email from the SharePoint workflow bot. So that is the power and the use of workflows. Workflows are really that big, awesome thing that you can do with SharePoint because it can automate so much. It can route documents to people. It can automatically fill stuff in. It can send reminder emails. It can assign tasks to people. It can track things. If things aren't done in a certain amount of time, it can then trigger more emails. It can be your personal assistant, kind of like your tasks and your calendar are on your iPhone or something like that. It can do that in your SharePoint site. So workflows really are the holy grail, big moment that makes SharePoint awesome, really makes your work organized and efficient and allows you to do all the things that you want to. So those are our 5 big, awesome ways that SharePoint 2013 can help your business organize and share. What I'm going to pop up now is just really quickly back to our slideshow. A couple of things to consider. At New Horizons, we offer classes for the site user, which is the basic people who just need to know how to upload files to SharePoint. That's it. Then we have classes for the site owner, site administrator, both kind of one-day classes, which are straight ahead. And then we have some of the Microsoft classes, which are usually 2-day, and they tend to be a little bit more advanced, a little bit more cool stuff in them. And we even go all the way up to things like server admin. So we have a whole bunch of classes for you to take if SharePoint becomes a big part of your work and you want to really know how to take advantage of all of these fantastic features. So with that in mind, and the few minutes that we have left, any questions you'd like to ask before we complete today? Unfortunately, I need to pull this thing back up. There we go. And now I can pull this up. So if you want to, you can type in the chat screen or the questions section if you'd like to type any questions at all.
Hey Ryan, there's one question, and I don't know if you see it. It says when you are co-authoring and someone changes the same field that you did, can you control which change is kept, or is it always the last?
In that case, so if you're co-authoring, if 2 people are working simultaneously, it's always the last that takes effect. If you're working with somebody else, you can sometimes just type on the screen, hey, stop doing that, or something like that. But because the co-authoring feature, because SharePoint is constantly updating, it will always show you what's been done. If you did it literally at the same millisecond, maybe it might freak out a little bit, but usually you would see that person's change as they're doing it. So it would be the kind of thing where if you wanted to change it back, you could change it back and then get in a little bit of a fight. But to answer the question, it is usually the last thing done. So you could type on the page, hey, don't change anything, it needs to be this, and be done with it, or wait for that person to disappear and then change it back, or something like that. But it will need to be the last one.
Okay. They said thank you. I think you hit their question exactly what they're looking for. And
Fantastic.
I don't see any other questions in there. Do you?
I don't. Doesn't really want to show me anything. I just see. Yeah, it's like this littlest box ever, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Okay, yeah, I think that should be it then.
All right, fantastic. thank you all, everybody, for attending. Hopefully you got all your questions answered and got all the little bits of information you need. And good luck with SharePoint 2013, and we'll see you in training in the future.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ryan. It was great.